Today's conversation is with Petro. Petro is at the V&A waterfront where she serves as the Senior Operations Manager. Petro, it's so lovely to have you here in conversation with us at the Branson Centre of Entrepreneurship South Africa. You are at the V&A waterfront as the Operations Manager, and there's so much that excites me about who you are, your role, and where your role actually takes place. I think for those who are listening, the V&A waterfront probably stands out as an attraction, a destination. What people may not know is that the V&A waterfront is Africa's most visited destination. I think for me, what is particularly interesting is that over and above that, the V&A waterfront is actually a beacon of innovation, and there's so much going on in that precinct. And so I'm excited to unpack that when talking to you, and especially in relation to food waste. So before we get started, please can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and perhaps what you want to add into the conversation about where you're at?
Thank you, Monwabisa. Yes, I have joined the waterfront a good 11 years ago, and I remember at the time it was quite mind-blowing for me to become part of such a dynamic team. And what was interesting at the time is not a lot of people realized that there is a whole operation and a lot of people involved in running the property. And up until today, I still get people that go, like, what? You work at the waterfront? As if they don't realize that we're operating a small city. So, in my role as Senior Operations Manager, I oversee all services related to cleaning, waste management, landscaping, and I have the honor to serve on our sustainability committee as well, which is really where my passion lies. And so I thoroughly enjoy what I do. I love just experiencing on a daily basis. We have an opportunity to learn, to experience, to test, to engage, and that really is such an exciting space.
Which is so exciting because at first glance, we think V&A waterfront, we think the shopping mall, and all we think about is shopping. And I love this idea of you talking about a small city. What does that mean for you when it comes to us then talking about food waste, specifically when it comes to the V&A waterfront?
Yeah, food waste is such an enormous and such an important topic. When you talk about food waste, I think for me the most important thing is to understand what that means. And food waste in essence is a resource. It's something that holds mass and nutritional value that's meant for human consumption that then goes to waste. So if you look at it from that perspective, it is important to realize that if you, from a humanitarian perspective, I read something the other day that said over 10 million people in South Africa experience hunger on a weekly basis. That is mind-blowing.
And let's put that into context. When we say 10 million people, what's the population of Cape Town?
Well, Wabisa, I'm not entirely sure, but I think there's about 4.7 million residents in Cape Town at the moment.
So that gives us wild perspective when you start talking about 10 million people who are going hungry in this country, because that's almost like twice the number of people who live in Cape Town and more.
Yes. And I think that when people think of food waste, they don't necessarily see something that holds nutritional value that could have been a meal. So for the V&A waterfront, talking about food waste, because we are surrounded by local communities and because we have a neighborhood that we're so exceptionally proud of, and it's something that forms our essence, it is important to realize that we deal with hungry people on a daily basis. Then from an economical perspective, the entire value chain comes with money, and it has a direct impact on our economy, from the farmer to the transporter to the processor to the retailer to the consumer, even all the way to landfill. There's associated costs, and it impacts on the economy. And more importantly, our natural environment. Food waste contributes hugely to carbon emissions. Again, I love statistics, but statistics have shown that about a third of food waste or food being produced globally turns into waste. The associated water in manufacturing that food is a staggering amount. I think I read it's the equivalent of the annual flow of the Zambezi River, and it could feed all household needs globally for a year. Then if you look at the land that is associated with food waste as well, I think it's something like 28%, which could be the footprint of China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan altogether. Carbon emissions, it's another thing. We have a future that we need to protect. We have to protect our biodiversity, and we have to make sure that we preserve our natural resources for our children and our children's children. So food waste is up at the top of it. It's really important that we find alternatives for that.
I think for me, what I like is talking about or reframing food waste as a resource. And I remember once listening to a conversation with Professor Linda Godfrey at the CSIR, and she was talking about that when we start talking about the future of work, it's actually figuring out how can we become resource managers as opposed to consumers or people who are project managing, again, consumptive activities. And so looking at food waste perhaps almost as an asset that can then enable others, whether because people now have access to food or it's repackaged and repurposed, I think is very, very interesting, particularly then from a Branson Center point of view when we start talking about making sure we have a good impact on people, planet, and profit. This is really the future, right? In fact, it's the present. And so, as somebody who is at the V&A Waterfront leading some of these conversations and leading the activities that look at perhaps solving for food waste and seeing food waste as, a reality. The V&A Waterfront, for example, has over 80 eateries, and that's just off the top of my lay head when I think about food waste on the precinct. Why should people in similar positions as you, in terms of people who are looking after other commercial precincts, why should they be involved in this conversation? Why should they care?
So I think that from our perspective, we as the landlord have access to partnerships, we have access to information, but more importantly, because of our presence in the community, we have a voice. And I think it's important that we lead by example. As you've mentioned, the bulk of our food waste comes from industries like food and beverage and the hospitality sector. And I think it is important that people realize that every time they go out for dinner, every time they buy something that they're not intending to eat or to consume, maybe not even on a conscious level, but on a subconscious level, it is important to understand the impact that has. And so the waste that we deal with in food waste, it's got a few components. And I think you're looking at a pre and a post-consumer. Your pre-consumer is where you have a controlled environment. That's typically in your kitchens. It's typically in your restaurants where chefs and assistants prepare food. And there already you have a choice in terms of what you do with it. How do you prepare your food? Then from a consumer perspective, again, there is a tendency where people are quite blasé about throwing away leftovers, where they're quite blasé about accepting that slice of lemon in their water. Why have it in the first place? You're not going to eat it. You might as well take a bag full of lemons and then just chuck it on landfill straight away. And so I do believe that we have a role to play in saying that it's not cool. If you want to garnish, find an alternative. Find something that's edible, that's usable. And find ways to understand that when you make choices, think about where it starts and where it ends and lead in that space.
It's so powerful, the example you use of the lemon in the water, because how many times do we actually form stories around food, right? And so when you're having water in your house, you're happy to just pour it out, get it out the tap and drink the water. But now suddenly when you're in an eatery, you want that slice of lemon in it because it makes you feel fancy. And so this idea of we actually have choices to make here, whether we're the consumers or whether we're the people who process the food. And so I think whilst it can be so easy to get caught up in the challenges and the doom and gloom of this conversation, because it is outrageous, it is heartbreaking, there's a moral imperative here, there's so many things to talk about when it comes to food waste and food loss. Let's move away from that. Yes. And let's focus then on the V&A Waterfront has been at the forefront of these conversations. And so what can you illustrate for us have been the wins, and perhaps what have been the lessons in terms of getting to those wins when you're in the conversation around food waste as a landlord, as a convener actually, and as a precinct?
Yes, so I think that in the food waste space, there's a lot of exciting development. We know that with the city and with local government imposing a ban on landfill for organic waste in the nearby future, there is an endless range of opportunities to look at and how to support that. From the V&A Waterfront's perspective, we've introduced waste separation policies and procedures a good 10 years ago, but we've actively started pushing for organic and food waste separation through our operations about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so what we do is we issue our tenants with a dedicated waste bin just for organic and for food waste. And that all goes for composting. So when we first started, I think our first month we recorded 1.2 tons. Our next month was about 7 tons. And our best month was 85 tons. And for us, that was amazing. First of all, just realizing that we're diverting waste from landfill, but more importantly, slowly but surely, as you work with your tenants and with your partners, there's small wins. Another exciting prospect for me is about 2 years ago, we launched our shared value strategy. And we're in a space now through Project Solve where we can build strategic partnerships to say we've identified that food waste is an issue. We have access to influential people. We have access to businesses. We have access to people who want to drive change. And even if we don't do it ourselves, how can we facilitate that? So we've had some very exciting workshops with our tenants, our food and beverage tenants, on how do we look at food waste? How do we break it down? Where do we look at small wins, low-hanging fruit, but where do we also plan for the future that we can effect bigger change? And I think it's only a matter of time. You know, there are wonderful organizations already that salvage food that can go to your impoverished areas, that could feed homeless people, feed the hungry. And so I think that we're at the base of what's going to be something really wonderful and exciting. There's a lot of opportunity.
And that makes me feel so hopeful, because sometimes it just feels like you don't know what to do and you're powerless and it's only but little old me. So to know that a precinct and an organization like the V&A Waterfront is actually driving for change that will have real tangible outcomes and impact on real people in this country, and a country that has people who need, gives me a sense of, okay, I'm now part of something. What is the V&A Waterfront doing to then make sure that anyone who interacts with the property actually understands what you're doing?
So I think that communication is key in this regard, and also to make sure that when you choose your partners, you make sure that there is a common alignment in terms of goals and objectives. It's not been hard. Fortunately, I think that our shared value strategy, the core of our business, the heart of the waterfront, is something that people in general find easy to associate with. And so just building on that, you move forward. I think, again, getting back to conversations, getting back to just sharing stories is pertinent. And fortunately, again, whether it is through social media, whether it is through just our marketing campaigns, or whether it is just by word of mouth, we have a strong voice. And I think that there's beautiful stories already in place that can be shared. But more importantly, you've referenced in your opening statement about how the waterfront represents a beacon of hope for people. We have seen many successful stories of people just, collaborating with the waterfront or having had exposure to our partners or to businesses where wonderful things came from. And I think that we're embracing that role as well. We cherish each and every individual that we engage with. And we do take our role as creating social value quite. It's important to us. Yes.
And I think as the V&A creates the social value, and it has, it's knitted into the fabric of the city of Cape Town, and then of course South Africa and into Africa, there is this big commercial aspect. And so when we start thinking about talking about shared value then becomes part of also a driver of commerce and hopefully prosperity. And so when we think about that, even from the Branson Center, we're curious to find out from your view, what are the commercial opportunities in terms of the trends that you're seeing through your work that could take place and manifest in a place like the V&A waterfront?
Yes. I think, again, that if you think about food waste and opportunity, especially in the Western Cape, almost in the entire value chain, there's opportunity from a producer right through to your end solution. There is a multitude of different technologies, for instance, available. If you think about the actual product and how they've done studies and how you have access now to products that can enhance your shelf life, for one. Then if you think about IT and using data to your benefit and how you as the waste generator can understand how much waste you generate, where's your hotspots or your blind spots, so to speak, and by just using data and analytics to better plan. If you think about access to resources or just by sharing information, there's wonderful apps and I think processes in place already in other countries where there's food sharing schemes or what they call food rescue programs, and I think one can build on that. And then lastly, I think from a waste diversion perspective, within the Western Cape, there's a limited amount of solutions to landfill that is sustainable. You have waste to energy, you've got composting, but there's a multitude of different approaches that one can take. You can grow mushrooms from coffee grinds, for goodness sake. So again, you don't have to find a solution for all of it. Start somewhere and just build on that. And I'm sure, with the right partnerships and with a little bit of help from a friend, you could really just make a significant change.
That is very exciting. Last question. What is the purpose of the V&A waterfront?
The purpose of the V&A waterfront, and oh gosh, if our CEO hears this now, I should be able to to say it word for word. But the V&A waterfront's purpose is to protect our natural environment and our resources and share what we have and create social value so that we could have a thriving community in a waterfront that is available to everybody.
That makes my heart sing, especially because it's so aligned even with us as the Branson Center, where our purpose is to change business for good. And so hearing what the purpose of the V&A waterfront is means that we're aligned in terms of looking at ourselves as a partnership. So thank you, Petro, for being a good partner for the Branson Center. Thank you for being an incredible conversationalist with me today. And thank you for sharing in terms of just that light in terms of what can be hopeful and what we can actually achieve going forward as we start thinking about existing in harmony with our planet.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for having me. I look forward to just seeing positive and great results working with the Branson Center for Entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you, Petro.